Happy Halloween, everybody. Spooky season is here, and of course that meant I got an excuse to watch one of my favorite Halloween films, Halloween. It's a genuine classic that has close to no flaws, and it's one of my favorite films ever. But after I watched it and the credits began to roll, something loomed in the back of my mind. This strange legacy sequel trilogy that came out 40 years after the first film. And this bizarre trilogy has haunted me. For some reason over the last year, I've been thinking about these movies almost constantly. There's something so interesting and bizarre about these films that I just can't understand. It's a trilogy so recent, but one that so little people talk about, and it has absolutely no love. And it feels like a blip that came and went and no one really talks about it. And I think that's fascinating. So I went back and rewatched this strange trilogy and looked at the bizarre Halloween trilogy that no one loved. First up is Halloween 2018, a legacy sequel that came out when legacy sequels were popping off the shelf, and all things considered, Halloween 2018 is a perfectly adequate legacy sequel, and just like The Force Awakens, that really was all it had to be after what had came before. It perfectly delivers on being a satisfying rematch between Laurie and Michael, and never betraying any of the previous characters, and being a quickly paced and satisfying continuation of the series. It though has instantly the hard task of answering the impossible question the first Halloween film proposes. How do you create a satisfying sequel to an ending that ambiguous? And that exact question is what made this film and this entire trilogy so interesting to me. Because just like many of you, I remember liking this movie when I first saw it, but I could not remember for the life of me nearly anything about this film, and that's because this movie is completely directionless. We even see this very early on in the film. In one of the first scenes in the movie, a character asks Laurie, is he the boogeyman or is he Michael Myers? A question that almost feels like it's coming from the filmmakers themselves. Should you lean into the horror of that first film where he's just credited as the Shape, or do you want to lean into the horror icon version of Michael, that slasher villain that everyone loves, but that's due to the other films that you're actively ignoring? And the film never fully answers this question. We even see this confusion a lot in the cinematography. Sometimes, yeah, Michael is shot as that horror, creepy character in Dark Lightning. And then other times it's the cool, bombastic Michael Myers, shot in full profile with awesome moments as clear as day. And this thorough confusion lies squarely on the writing. This movie's carried enough with its strong direction at points, its good camera work, and incredible score by John Carpenter, but the writing causes tonal whiplash along with very jittery pacing, going from bizarre humor to intense trauma to beautifully shot long takes to jarring, intense jump scare modern horror with flashing lights. All of it works well enough in the moment due to some very well shot horror and a near flawless soundtrack that we'll talk about later. But on a story level, when you finish this film and you compare it to the first film that is so strongly motivated and created with such a personal vision, it's like you're comparing a stack of cards that is beautiful. It's like comparing a stack of cards that's perfectly made, and then you look over at the 2018 version sort of just in the corner copying it, but it copied it by taping all the cards together. The film's final minutes being a perfect comparison between the two. Halloween 1978 having everything lead towards this amazing ending where it's just these ambiguous, haunting final shots. And then you have in the 2018 version, Michael burning, a beautiful image of evil dying but possibly haunting Allison while she's holding a knife, hinting at her being kind of evil and that being contagious. That was somewhat shown earlier but not really elaborated on. And then just cuts to credits. And I think that shows that there's a clear difference between a film being purposefully ambiguous and a film just being confused by the end of its runtime. Halloween 2018 though, overall, is still enjoyable. It just doesn't know what it always wants to be, and most of the time it has no idea what it's saying. And while it's enjoyable in the moment, when you look back at it, it's kind of just a completely forgettable film. But the movie did make a buttload of money, and that did get a sequel greenlit. So the boys locked in, they worked like madmen, and when the world opened up after COVID, they decided this was going to be a trilogy, dang it. And now they had a clear identity and a plan going forward. And let's see what happened. Oh no. Halloween Kills is such a nightmare to dissect because it goes wrong in nearly every direction, because it's a film that has no direction. It decides that the only direction forward is to build off every single loose thread from the 1978 and 2018 film, leading to this convoluted nightmare of subplots and characters and a mob story with no center to it. Yet, as bad as this film is, it's actually crucial when it comes to the third film, Halloween Ends. And while this film does take place the same day as the 2018 Halloween film, it is much more of a setup for Halloween Ends, which takes place 4 years later. Did I lose you guys back there? Halloween Kills fleshes out the town much more. We see iconography that will be crucial in the sequel, such as the radio tower, and we understand this town better. But it's also trying to be a direct sequel to the previous Halloween films, building off both of those stories while also adding a town riot storyline. It's an absolute mess. Yet the idea of their story for Michael Myers is really interesting. Having him emerge from the fire, no longer a shadow lurking in the dark but a vessel for vengeance, is a great moment for this trilogy as it shows that they finally know what they want to do with with their most important character, being a clear metaphor for his transition from the horror character of the 1978 film to the slasher monster we know that is truly unstoppable. Yet Michael only lives up to the title Halloween Kills in the fireman scene and the final 3 minutes of the film. But the idea is so good, and there's so many interesting ideas, such as seeing what happened after Halloween night, along with all these grown-up characters, and seeing Michael as a full-on unstoppable monster that makes this film so interesting to watch because it is trying to do everything as a sequel and failing spectacularly to do all of that by truly achieving nothing. It has the heart and it is swinging for the fences, but it just lands straight on its face. But this bizarre sequel does set up one of the most interesting finales we've ever seen in a trilogy recently, with just how unique and different it is as a final film in a series. And all that culminates in Halloween Ends. Halloween Ends takes a huge bold swing with the franchise, focusing not on Michael, but a new type of horror. A horror that is contagious, infecting a new killer named Corey Cunningham, and just like Halloween 3, we finally get a new horror other than Michael. It's a fascinating look at hatred and the generational trauma that is passed down if we're not careful. Halloween Ends finally takes that next step in the series to actually move it forward, almost leaving Laurie completely behind as we focus on Corey and Allison and their relationship. That slow corruption though of Corey is heartbreaking, and when he does run into Michael, it does feel like 2 generations finally coming together. And that parallel of Corey and Michael and Allison and Laurie is a really interesting parallel between the 2 pairs. One pair working seamlessly together and having an amazing scene with Corey and Michael killing together, and then we see the reverse where Allison's relationship is slowly weakening with Laurie until she moves away. That evil then finally taking over Corey one last time as he steals Michael's mask, killing him and succumbing to that faceless evil. An interesting and horrifying tragedy of evil that passed on from generational trauma. Or at least that's what the movie should have done. The movie actually realizes it's called Halloween Ends and then tacks on an awful 20 minutes where Michael comes out of nowhere and he goes and fights Laurie and dies. It's just so bad. Let me tell you about it. So Corey dies, Allison ends up leaving the story, and then Laurie, the character we don't care about, ends up fighting Michael, and we have to watch this horrible last 20 minutes of the movie that are super boring, and then we see Michael die, whatever. The last 20 minutes of this movie nearly ruined the entire movie for me, and it's a perfect encapsulation for me of this entire trilogy. This movie almost being able to step in and create something completely original, only for fear and weight of the franchise to hold it back from taking that next creative step forward to make it its own thing. When the entire town gathers together to celebrate the death of Michael Myers at the end, it feels so hollow. None of this was naturally built up. Instead, just showing characters we have seen from the previous movies to be some sort of reconciliation for not having any story that connects to Michael in this movie. But when it is ending though, it doesn't feel totally wrong. This does work as a final moment for this trilogy, and it's not because of what you're actually seeing on screen, it's what you're hearing. The reason you liked watching these movies in the moment is because of that amazing soundtrack by John Carpenter. He absolutely kills every scene, and that, with some decent to strong imagery, makes nearly every scene in all of these movies watchable. When you walk out of these movies, you don't really remember what they did, but you do remember how you feel. You remember the strong synthwave and horror music and some pretty good kills in these pretty bland movies, but at least that's interesting to you, and you're going to remember that. In a bizarre way, the reason you remember and like these movies is because they brought back the one person who made the first one. That pure creativity by a genius is what makes these kills and these moments so strong. And very similar to Tron Legacy, it's a movie where I don't remember a single thing that really happens in the story, but man, if Daft Punk and John Carpenter don't drop some of the greatest soundtracks in these movies of all time. So when I look back at this trilogy, I don't really see a David Gordon Green remake trilogy as disappointing. I just see that one time in history where John Carpenter got an excuse to make 3 killer soundtracks, and then David Gordon Green made some pretty cool music videos. And honestly, I'll take some really cool looking music videos that are really weird and don't really work over bland movies any day of the week. And while I don't love this trilogy, looking back on it now, I can appreciate it a lot more. And honestly, the fact that these movies are just interesting sequels with really cool soundtracks and really good kills is honestly enough for me, and these movies do deserve a bit more love.